Hello.
Good afternoon, sir.
Very good afternoon here.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, very good afternoon, all of you. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, very good afternoon. Today we'll do paper 3. Is it paper 3 or 4? Last class we have done post-colonialism, modernism.
Post-colonialism.
Yeah, we have done all this, no? Yeah.
Paper 3.
Yeah. We'll do. We'll do that. No? మేడం నేను క్లాస్లో ఉన్నా చెప్పండి వచ్చినా మీరు చెప్పండి Hello. Hello. Yeah, hello.
Yes, sir. Hello? Yes, sir.
Yeah, we'll start today. Nation, nationality, nationalism. Okay. Do you have the textbook?
Nation, nationality, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Paper 3, sir.
Nation, nationality, and nationalism.
4th lesson, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Rani Tejendra, please mute yourselves.
please, all of you, mute your electronic gadgets. Galaxy, who is okay, right. So now we'll do today. So as you all know that what is nation? What is nation? Hello, please. Can anyone of you please tell?
Country, sir.
Country, sir.
Nation is a country? Yes.
Yes, sir.
I think so.
A group of people.
Okay. And what is nationality? What is nationality?
So representing the traditions and culture.
And what is nationalism?
Nationality is citizenship, sir.
Citizenship. Okay. So during the colonial time, we had the nation, nationality, nationalism. Okay. So as we all know that how the term emerged to say that this is my nation and I am belong to this nationality and we have the nationalism. A large body of people united by common descent, history, culture or language inhabiting a particular country or territory. The world's leading industrialized nations. So here, as we all know that in the history of recent times, the concept under discussion has undergone several levels of rise and fall. So here, nation, nationality, nationalism are used in any country. And in recent times, this nationalism, nationality under the discussion. If you look at India and nationalism and its impact in the motherland. It sensitizes to unite the people to serve the.
Sir, what?
Pardon?
Sir.
Your voice is not.
Sir, we are unable to hear your voice.
Now is it okay?
Sometimes it is increasing and decreasing. Sir.
Sir, some people are talking via. We are getting a lot of disturbance, sir. Some people are unmuted.
చేసినాం సార్ చేసినాము ఒక 13,000 డిఫరెన్స్ అది ఫైన్ యాడ్ అవుతుంది సార్ అది 300 రూపీస్ ఎగ్జామ్షన్ ఇస్తే క్యాలెక్ట్ లేదు సార్ పే చేసినాం సార్
Azima, please unmute.
Now YouTube पे जाओ, बाहर जाके YouTube पे जाओ.
Recording stopped.
Okay. So here, as we all know that hello. Yeah. So during the independence movement, we had the nationalism, and it's a pride of the people of India. If we look at that, how we have the multilingual cultural traditions, but we all known as Indians because of the unity in diversity. Here, one of the thinkers, Partha Chatterjee, stated that in the 1950s and 60s, nationalism was still regarded as a feature of victorious anti-colonial struggles in Asia and Africa. Can you hear me? Is it audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So here he says that how nation during the colonial time of the independence movement and in post-independence like 1950s and 60s, it has its features, and it shows that victorious anti-colonial struggles in Asia and Africa. Simultaneously, as the new institutional practices of the economy and polity in the post-colonial states were disciplines and normalized under the conceptual rubrics of development and modernization. So if we look at the way how colonial India and post-colonial India keep on changing its socio-political, economical and cultural development in the name of the modernization. This is what here we can understand how nationalism united the people irrespective of their culture, language, tradition and region to have that kind of integrity and unity. As Partha Chatterjee stated, it is ultimately resulting in ethnic conflicts and the other aspects. So here somebody may question, why do we need nationality and nationalism? And somebody may question the broader perspective of its identity politics, that nationalism without nation, by Aloysius. He wrote a book called The Way to Understand the Social Hierarchy. And here, why do we need to have this kind of inclusive in terms of the nationalism. Referred to a racial group rather than a politically organized group, and says here Raymond Williams, the two overlapped. Eventually, it emerged in its predominant modern sense
Recording
of
in
a
progress.
political formation. So here it is a strategy to unite the people and develop the country. And if you look at the political thinkers, critics, intellectuals, they had a doubt. Is it a nation without the inequalities to unite the people, or it is a political formation? What for these formations of nation, nationality, and nationalism? So here we have different aspects of nation, state, nationalist, and nationalism. Here we have groups, politically organized groups, the whole people with some groups within it. So when we look at this kind of whatever the formation of groups and the political organized groups, here some groups within it, and here a political movement aimed to achieve freedom from colonial domination, for instance the Indian national movement. So here if we look at this kind of formation of nation, nationality, nationalism, and its background shows that it leads towards the freedom from colonial domination. So when we look at the formation of the terms, or with this kind of background, or to uplift the colonized state or country, to unite the people and to have the freedom. So here when we look at the way to understand the broader perspective of nation, nationalism, and nationality, to understand the strategy of development as well as freedom from the colonial power. Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah. So here, if we look at all these formations, then uh, we can understand how the formations had the broader perspective to develop the colonized country like India, as well as the freedom struggle from the colonial power. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So here, the economic sense, which is expressed by the word nationalization and nationalization of banks, and here we have seen that how the development in terms of the nationalization of economic related uh, commercial oriented banks. And here we have another perspective that one of the thinkers, Jeremy Hawthorne, he says that in post-colonial India, we have this kind of concepts to unite the people and to hello,
Yes, sir.
yeah, consisting of separate peoples and cultures. So this is one of the other political thinker stated. So like that, here we can say in terms of the formation of nation, nationality, and nationalism by the political thinkers' definition as well as their observations, which are around the formation of nation, nationalism, and nationality. Here, he says that very often such usages equated nation and state witness the term nation state, although the concept of a state is more tightly defined in terms of politico economic terms. So, here we can understand how this term has been evolving the state in terms of development, freedom, formation of the different structures of the administration. Nationalism exists, but with various descriptions depending on historical and political factors.
Okay.
हाँ बस पिज्जा दो। अच्छा वो क्या हुआ जी वो भी पिज्जा दो नहीं तो अपना हाँ हेलो
Sir,
हेलो
yes.
yeah. So here
Yes, sir.
yeah. So on the formation of these terms, each and every political thinker, intellectual, have their definition according to the time and the function of its political as well as administrative and the other functions of the country. So here, when we look at all these, the French writer Ernest Lewis had as the Billcraft, and the French writer here, had their definition on the nations or something fairly new in history. So here, there was no such kind of term in the history. It's a new term, and in Egypt, China, and ancient Chaldea were in no way nations. If you look at the son of the soil and other countries like China and Egypt, and here the way how it includes in a broader perspective to state the classical antiquity and republics, municipal kingdoms, confederations of local republics and empires. Yet it can hardly be said to have had nations in our understanding of the term. So here in post-colonial literature, the formation of the terms had the historical background. Here, if we look at the contextual understanding of the nation is a distinct entity, and it emerged to decline of the medieval structures and feudal regimes. So it is a break from the outdated medieval structures and feudal regimes. It is a new idea to open the doors for the inclusion and integrity and development in terms of modernity. Here, Homi Bhabha stated that as per the nation, it is both historical, determined, and general. It has the background of history, and it determines, and it is to view a general concept that one can include himself or herself, and it is something more ancient and nebulous. Nation, a local community, domicile, family, condition to condition of belonging. So we can understand how the formation had this kind of historical background. Hello students, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So as we have seen, the way back to centuries, there was no such kind of thing.
Okay.
Soon after, the invaders and colonizers landed as traders in our India, then the intellectuals and reformers, political thinkers and leaders, they had this kind of idea of unity in diversity, and they opened the new ways of inclusiveness with the integrity. Here we have seen Homi K. Bhabha, Partha Chatterjee, Raymond Williams, and Hatton definitions about the nation and nationality. So here, in terms of the nation, nationality, it draws our attention that it is a memory of fragments. Here, Homi Bhabha should think of immemorial past as equivalent to an amorphous lump of a past, which has no literature and culture worth the name or status of a rational or order views of life is not surprise. If we look at the nation, nationality, and nationalism, it generates the idea of ambiguity because the definition in terms of all these aspects, we can exchange our views, we can discuss, and we can define according to the context. Similarly, here we have that kind of Western academia also indispensable that they dare not to think of any other model of what a cohesive nation could be. As we know that the consequence of colonizing the idea of nation and the nation state here, its history or indigeneity we can see in terms of the definition by Derek Walcott. As we all know that is all these bastards have left us words, and if, as Dennis Wilder, post-colonial literature in English, Blackwell Indian, here he says that Caribbean's writing says uncertainty of identity reflects an uncertainty about the past. See, it is ironic that even certainty of the past of people living for ages in their own habitat are not allowed to have their own identity. So here, if we look at the pre-colonial and during the colonial and the post-colonial, how the fragments of memories are with the past and its people, and the people of the past may not allowed to have their own identity because they will become subverted and will have a new formation of this kind. So it is the loss of identity of the motherland as well as the language and culture and the way they have to disown in terms of building the nation, and it could be a challenge for them to claim the past of their history. The issue is here, they have to disown the past and history of their culture because they have to include themselves in the new formation of the nation. So here, in any country, for instance, here, a third world country like India has its multi-layers in the history as well as the past, which is with this kind of fragments of memories and identities. But whenever the term engages them, then definitely they have to leave the past because they have to identify themselves in the name of nation, nationality, and nationalism. Students, hello.
Sir, what is hegemony, sir?
Pardon?
Yes.
Hegemony.
Hegemony is nothing but power politics. Power. Hegemony is, with a single person or a group of people. For instance, here, king is with the hegemony, power. Okay. Yeah. So here, when you look at this kind of hegemony, and hierarchy of the past, you have to look at the new idea of the nation, because it always suppresses the past and the identity of the people. So here, this is the paradox when we look at the concept of nation and nation state. So, as we all know that the new concept, which is inclusive at the same time exclusive in terms of its unity in diversity. The marginals will remain as marginals, and the center always will be highlighted with the mainstream. So this is a paradoxical view and the background of its formation. But here, no one thinks that how the past as well as the present formation will be a concept with the dynamics of nation and nationality. So it is another and a more sophisticated variation of subtle hegemony. So hegemony is a power. Power politics always for the survival strategies of the mainstream. So here, the minorities do not have any kind of share or any kind of identity of their belonging, because can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, because here in a larger concept like nation, nationality, nationalism, the marginals have to forego their identity. It is one of the facts of the formation of the new idea of these terms. And hegemony always tries to become a hurdle or a strategy for the survival of the king or a group of people. So if you look at the nation with this kind of paradoxical state practices, then here we have that how we can look at this, pointing out that in spite of theoretical discussion, here we have in practice there were only three criteria. Hello? Hello?
Excuse me, sir. Which topic?
Is it audible?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Voice clear, sir. Voice clear, but she's asking which topic. Asking.
Hello? No, here nation and nationality. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So look at here how it is paradoxical and how it is making sense of its identity politics, as well as the way how we have to look at from this kind of historical background that the nation, which is an inclusive and at the same time it is exclusive. So when we look at all these hello students.
Yes.
Yeah. So here we have the practices which are with this kind of background. The first was its historic association with current state or one with a fairly lengthy and recent past. The second criterion was the existence of a long-established cultural elite possessing a written national literary and administrative vernacular. Third is with that kind of capacity for conquest. Here it is in 19th century, Darwinian proof of evolutionary success as a species, as a social species. So here E.J. Hobsbawm and nation and nationalism since 1780s. Here we can see that how this is a strategy of the formation. And if you look at Hobsbawm, underly the ideologies of the era of rampant liberalism from 1830 to 1880. And here, if you look at one of the points, historic association is defined now as in the past with Britain and now with America. The superpower concept is the extended form. So when we look at this kind of aspect of the nation, nationalism and nationality, we can understand how it is a historic association and it is an extended form. If you look at the second point, then you can see that a cultural elite and written discourse about administration as the ex-colonies follows all this. So there is no any kind of new thing, but only the concept was not there earlier. It is nothing but a old wine in a new bottle. And the third point here, the criterion of conquest, which Hobsbawm apologetically says is unfortunate, has it ceased. The conquest is now on in a big way. So here, when we look at the colonial, pre-colonial and post-colonial India, we can see it is the continuation of the imperial power rather than the death of the imperialism. So as we have seen in the first class that Orientalism and here it is nationalism. If you look at before this colonialism and imperialism, similarly here it is the continuation of the imperialism, and it is with the new idea to expose the broader perspective, but it leaves the marginals with that kind of nostalgia of their past, because they wish to have their own idea of their culture, tradition, and language, but they were included to have a broad perspective because of this nation, nationality, and nationalism. So here it is nothing but subverting the identity of the minorities to form a new idea and to forego their cultural history. Say, for instance, it is language and tradition. With this, you can see it is a paradoxical. And if you look at the literature, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So if you look at the literature of the indigenous and the way how it is with the making sense of their language with the cultural and historical background. So here, if you look at the concept and its discourse and analysis of different political thinkers, here we have Frank Fanon. Delving deep down into one's own past is far more significant and in kind different from what is dismissed as revivalism or retreat, he says. So here, the native intellectuals they had that kind of observation as well as their insightful comments about the formation of nationality and nationalism. Here, they found that it has the fragments of memories as well as compartmentalization and disowning the past of the marginals. So let us make no mistake, it was with the greatest uh, delight that they discovered that there was nothing to be ashamed of in the past, but rather dignity, glory, and solemnity. If we look at the pre-colonial time and during the colonial time, we had the richness of education through the ashrama system and Nalanda, Takshashila universities. Now, the moment we have the colonization and the post-colonialism, here we have the Cambridge and Oxford universities. So here, what happened to the history of that richness of the education? We were colonized to forego the richness of the scripts from the colonial India. France says the claim to a national culture in the past does not only rehabilitate the nation and serve a justification for the hope of future national culture. So here, until unless we have that kind of our own culture, we will not have that fruitful results of this national culture. So here we have this kind of colonialism and post-colonialism, and to discuss on this formation of the nationalism and nationality. As and when we look at a national culture is not a folklore nor an abstract populism that it can discover the people's true nature. So as I told you, that a national culture is the body of efforts made by a people in the sphere of thought to describe, justify, and praise the action through which that people has created itself and keeps itself in existence. So this is what here we can say that how it is in broader perspective, but it has the dark side too. As and when here the critics and thinkers had coined in terms of the past and formation of nationality, and nationalism. If you look at the observations of the political intellectuals and their contribution to the unity in diversity, then how it is with this kind of national culture. So with this, I know say that how nationalism are to build the unity in diversity, to develop the country, as well as to unite the people against the colonial empire, that is nothing but British Empire, to establish that kind of unity in diversity. So here, this topic is over.
That means,
Yes.
sir, that post-colonialism means we can say that nationalism is the only national identity. No, sir?
So here, nation, nationality, nationalism formed to liberate from the colonial power. After getting the independence, you can see the post-colonialism. So before the post-colonialism, we had the nation, nationality and nationalism to liberate the country from the colonial power. So you can see the difference between the post-colonialism, nationalism, because here one is during the colonial, the other one is after the independence. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now we'll come to the ethnicity. Here in this concept,
Sir, 1 second, sir. But in textbook, it is given that about immemorial past and everything, no, sir. That one I have not understood.
well, yeah. See here, whenever you look at nation, nationality, nationalism, in a broader perspective to include yourselves as an identity of a country, and you have your own past of culture, language, tradition, but you have to include yourselves that you are an Indian. Now, are you able to understand? You have the past of your own, that is, a memory, a reminiscence, a nostalgia of your identity. But whenever you say an Indian, you are not with one identity of a Telugu language or Telangana. Now, are you able to understand?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So you have that kind of a memory of your past of your language, that I am a Telugu speaker and the state of Telangana. But in a broader perspective, with this kind of nation, nationality, nationalism, you are an Indian. Is it or not? So your identity is subverted to have the national culture. Are you able to understand?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Now we'll come to ethnicity. A group sharing a common origins, culture or language. Okay? Can any one of you read one of the paragraphs first, please? Page
One of the
number
sources.
21.
Okay, sir. One of the sources of endless, often violent conflicts and confrontations is ethnicity. Basically, this arises from several sources. Yes, but the most dominant is the faith of one's own superiority as a race, a tradition, or a culture. Let us first look at some of the descriptions of what is ethnic or ethnicity. According to the Oxford Learner's Dictionary, it says ethnic connected with or belonging to a race, nation, or tribe that shares a cultural tradition.
Hello? Hello,
Yes,
friends?
sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah. So here we have seen that each and every term with its identity, how they are formed in the backdrop of the colonial time. Here we have ethnicity. It is nothing but a group sharing a common origins in terms of the language or the culture. So race, nation, tribe, and that shares a cultural tradition. So this is what you can see, that how ethnicity, ethnic literature, you see here that concepts like nation to be taken, that is where the second description helps. There are elements in our conception of ethnicity. So here we have the Western ethnic groups and Eastern ethnic groups. So like that here, when we look at all these terms to modernize the identity. Hello? Hello? Hello, students?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Historiographer Sudhir Chandra says, while all understanding is eventually is one's own terms, any encounter with other, that is the alien and the unfamiliar, ought to result in process of questioning, modifying, and extension of these terms. So here it is nothing but an incorporation to form the idea of ethnicity and the language, culture. As I said, we look at how Indian context, the concept of jati and varna, how it unites the people in the name of the language. So Raymond Williams here mentions that English ethnic has been in English since 14th century. So way back to centuries, maybe ethnicos, Greeks, and here if you look at the old English, Middle English, Modern English, there were groups, and here if you look at the language, history of English language, we have the different cults. So ethnic came to be used in the United States as what was described in 1961 as a political term for Jews, Italians, and other lesser breeds. Obviously, in this description, ethnic has come to mean a synonymous equivalent to heathen or pagan. Heathen obviously mean uncivilized or rather undeveloped. Ethnicity and ethnic therefore developed. So here, the way the terms are formed in the history of any country to represent the identity of people. Here, ethnic conflicts ultimately have their origins here in this notion of ethnic superiority. And in terms of the ethnicity, the second way of description here with this kind of distinction between ethnicity and race. Ethnicity is a term that has been used increasingly since the 1960s. It is nothing but post-coloniality and human variation in terms of culture, tradition, language, social patterns, and ancestry. Rather than the discredited generalization of race with its assumption of a humanity divided into fixed genetically determined biologically types. So here if you look at the difference between the ethnicity and race. So blacks you can see with the color, and in terms of the race you can identify that with one type biologically, genetically.
Yes, sir.
And they may be divided. But here, in terms of the ethnicity, they have the group of cultures together at one place, maybe tradition or language or social patterns and ancestry. Race has connotations of superiority, hegemony, colonization, burden of the West to civilize other undeveloped races, etc. Race is now replaced by ethnicity. So here, the term, how it has the background to transform the identity of the people, culture, language, or their tradition. That could be any kind of thing. So here, how race is now replaced by ethnicity. Explaining this, Ashley Biltrapt, he says that between these two, whereas race emerged as a way of establishing a hierarchical division between Europe and its others. For instance, here we have the whites and blacks, and when we look at this kind of identity between the people because of the race, here it is usually deployed as an expression of positive self-perception. Members of an ethnic group is shaped according to certain agreed criteria. Ethnicity became a multi-definitional and descriptive phenomenon. So here it has multiple ways of understanding the concept in terms of a group and their cultural and language representation. One of the thinkers here, Vamos Solis, says, I have stated that Abraham's son's universalist interpretation, and I have 3 reasons for doing so. First, the interpretation of the rites and rituals of culturally dominant groups sometimes provides the matrix for the emergence of divergent group identities. Second, discussions of ethnicity and the production of ethnic literature have been strongly affected by the Afro-American and so actively influenced by them since World War II, that an omission of Afro-American tradition in a discussion of ethnic cultures in America would create a serious gap in our reflections. So, in an extension of the race to ethnicity, and here explaining with this kind of background of the Afro-American phenomenon, it has its historical background. At the same time, it has its multiplicity in terms of its understanding the difference between race and ethnicity. Afro-American groups, as well as liberation of immigration laws, if we look at this kind of new ethnics, and there is a new cultural politics which engages rather than suppresses the differences, and which depends in part on the construction of new ethnic identities. In postcolonial studies, the new ethnicities, as per the historical background, Derrida's analysis on the result of globalization and liberalism, here cities like New York, London and Paris attract new ethnicities. So here the way how race was replaced by ethnicity. Similarly, the modernity of the cultural representation of a group, also one of the aspects of the new ethnicities. Here, integration of the other obviously is not so easily accomplished as neat academic energy seem to hope for. There are many thinkers, novelists who transcend ethnic boundaries and yet show authentic awareness of their own ethos, but without nostalgia or a sense of alienation. For instance, Bharti Mukherjee, who portrays the paradoxes of an immigrant woman in Jasmine and her other novels. So here, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
For instance, if you look at the literature of India with many names, Anglo-Indian, Indo-Anglian, Indian writing in English, Indian English writing, Indian literature in translation. If you look at one of the aspects of the formation of its identity of its literature, here one of the writers had that kind of nostalgia of the motherland. Similarly, how people are longing to look at the motherland through the lens of foreign eyes. For instance, here the immigrants whoever settled in America and they viewed their motherland with that kind of nostalgia, culture, tradition, and language. As and when they form a group of their ethnicity, they had tried to explore the difference between the motherland and foreign. So here, one of the writers of ethnic literature, Bharti Mukherjee, portrays the paradoxes of an immigrant woman in Jasmine and her other novels. Finally, a new, somewhat odd trend is slowly taking shape. The ethnic minorities or immigrants are now choosing their own languages, even while living in the midst of a US city like Los Angeles. For instance, if you look at one of the Tamil poets, Parthasarathis, rough passage, and its nostalgia, exile, as well as the way how he had the touch of the schizophrenia. It's divided into three parts. One is exile, nostalgia, and schizophrenic. As he says in that extract of from Homecoming, he had that kind of touch of the language, but he says, I am no longer as I am because my tongue is in English chains. So similarly here, immigrants to Los Angeles are bypassing English and learning Korean or Spanish first. So here you would think that an immigrant to the US would have to learn English. The reality is that Los Angeles is very ethnically diverse. In many business that immigrants are working in the primary language spoken, there is not English. In a Korean store, most of the customers spoke little or no English, and one immigrant wanted to be one of the few Spanish speaking employees who could help customers find just the right kind of fish or direct them to canned vegetables. So here we can look at that how immigrants had that kind of ethnic representation as well as their concerns towards the language and existential reality. Indeed, one immigrant confirms in California, Spanish is more important than English. Said. Talk is your relative. I haven't found any inconvenience because I don't speak English. I don't need to speak English. If you can speak Spanish, you can drive employers, can have clients, you can order in restaurants, you can do anything. Clinching the fact, one says, all that you need in California is Spanish. So here, the ethnicity of the culture and language matters in terms of the survival. In spite of all this ethnicity in a multicultural, multi-economic context remains a very controversial issue. Perhaps the former colonizers find it difficult to reconcile themselves to the remarkable proliferation of former colonials in many Western countries. The resulting paradoxes need to be addressed globally in a holistic manner, not just literary texts alone, but the complex web of relations in which they exist. So, as we have seen the difference between the race and ethnicity and how it is with this kind of inclusiveness as well as its existential reality with the language and the complex web of relations. No matter of your mother tongue, you should have that kind of complex web of relations in which they exist. For instance, if you look at Telangana state, here the people of Telangana are not only with one language, they are with the multilingual exposure. Exclusively here in Hyderabad, people have that kind of code mixing and code switching into their complex web of relations in which they exist. So with this, ethnicity is completed, and then we'll see Australian literary domain, some trends and approaches. Hello? Hello, students?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So now we'll come to the another topic. Can anyone of you read the first paragraph?
Sir,
Can you share any material about this topic, sir?
sir.
Yeah.
Could you
See
please
here.
give a
First, let
conclusion,
me.
sir?
Pardon?
Now you said in a topic. Once you give a conclusion, sir.
Yeah. So here, in this topic, we have the race and ethnicity. Race is the identity of genetically determined biological types divided into fixed identity, human identity with color or genetically determined. But whereas ethnicity is with a group of people in terms of the culture, tradition, language, social patterns of ancestry. They form as a group to have the complex web of relations with others. So in a broader perspective, race was replaced by the ethnicity. And ethnicity is with this kind of group of people of traditions, culture, language, and here they may have their identity of social patterns. The way it has the kind of historical background to look at the race as a sect, as a identity of a biology, or divided into fixed genetically identity, and it is making that kind of identity with the people of that race, with the biological representation. Say for instance, blacks in America, biological representation is with the a limited identity of human beings, or with that kind of formation of their identity as a race. And if you look at in an extension of the race, ethnicity emerges to extend the identity of the race with different cultures. For instance, Indians, settle down in America. They represent as Indians with the identity of language, culture, and their identity in that kind of multiculturalism as a schizophrenic exile. In terms of this schizophrenic and exile and exclusion, our writers emerge to look at their motherland from the foreign lens. Here, as I mentioned, Bharati Mukherjee's Jasmine, and how you look at the ethnic literature with this kind of historical background, then we can see how the culture and language matters in terms of the identity politics of survival as well as the literature. Here, in terms of the language, we should not bound to our mother tongue. We should have the kind of complex web of relations in a contemporary society. So here, ethnicity opens the doors to see that to form a group in terms of the culture, tradition, and the language. Hello? Please unmute one of your friends. Unmuted. Please. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. There was a, so yeah. Now we'll come to the another topic. Are you able to understand?
Okay. Listen.
Yeah. Can
Any important questions now?
From this, what is ethnicity and why ethnicity a source of conflict, and how it is relevant to the 1960s? What are the features of ethnic communities and the formation of ethnicity in terms of its impact on literature as a ethnic literature? So like that. Now, what is the next topic? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what is the next topic?
Australian literary domain.
Can you
Some
read this
trends
one?
and approaches.
Can you read this paragraph, please?
Hello, sir.
Hello?
Yeah, Russell Ward, in his Colonialism and Culture, has this to say of Patrick White. I think that at last we have a great Australian novelist precisely because he is first a novelist and only incidentally an Australian. I don't know if this is a satisfactory way of indicating the emergence of a genuine Australian literature or even of a new literature. Would it be right, for example, to say that we have in D.H. Lawrence a great novelist precisely because he is first a novelist and only incidentally English? I don't think so. And we have also to remember what Lawrence himself says, and I am English and my Englishness is my very vision. I bring in this quote from Lawrence because I am afraid there is no easy and ready-made solutions to the complex and
మీరు
complicated
అది
problems.
పంపిస్తారా మ్యామ్? లెటర్ పంపిస్తారు రేపు? ఆ లెటర్ పంపించండి మీరు రేపు. మీకు క్లర్క్ ఉంటారు కదా?
నేను ప్యాకెట్ ఇప్పిస్తాను నువ్వు లేదు నీకు కూడా సరే. అయ్యో
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. See here. In any literature, there are trends and approaches. One of the thinkers, Russell Watt, colonialism and culture has this to say. Patrick White, I think that at last we have a great Australian novelist, precisely because he is first a novelist and only incidentally an Australian. So here, the way I emphasized here, I don't know if this is a satisfactory way of indicating the emergence of genuine Australian literature or even of a new literature. So here, the literature with the emphasis of I, D.H. Lawrence says that, and I am English and my Englishness is my very vision. I bring in this quote from D.H. Lawrence because I am afraid there is no easy and ready-made solution to the complex and complicated problem of personal and national identity. As we all know that complexity of the term and its problem and preoccupation of creative writers. Here, under different names and movements, because in Australia, socio-economical and political pressures have in a decisive sense been powerful determinants so far as critical thinking is concerned. So here, nation means not only one single person. It is with the complexity whom we have to understand. Here, The Australian literary domain is also a representation of that complexity. In poetry, Bernard O'Down voiced something very similar, and freshening with unpolluted light till we become ourselves distinct Australian. So here we have to own up that a broader perspective, but at the same time as a separate entity. For instance, we say as a group an Indian, but in terms of your personal identity, you are belong to a Telangana. So like that, here you have to identify you are with this kind of distinct entity of your group or region. In the Australian desert, then there is a John Orridge, and here he says that a rational realism, that white is more characteristic. In terms of themes or techniques, is to the leftist writers undemocratic, violates the distinct Australian view and therefore is suspect. So here we have different types of identities of our family, language, tradition, culture, region, but our representation with one solid element of the nation. So here we have different definitions about the African literary domain or Australian literary domain, but here in the light of such simplistic notions of the function of literary criticism, here we have Eddie Hope to understand little to his credit in understanding the temper and needs of Australian literature. Australian literary criticism, another equally distinct line of thinking, and it has an equally respectable ancestry. If you look at 19th century, as well as the writers and critics, they had stated that its identity with their contextual reality and the representation of the thematic concerns are also bound to their representation. Australian literature certainly presents us with issues which are both complex and complicated, and neither a purely Australian approach nor a formalist approach. As we all know that even in Indian English writing also complex and complicated identities have been emerging. And it's a peculiar literary and cultural situation raises a question which is theoretical as well as practical. How is it possible for a writer to be deeply, unmistakably, and representatively here? How we have to understand the African literature. Similarly, we have the American literature, American Dream. as well as the Australian dream as constructed with the American emphasis. So here, Judith Wright, the Australian dream as contrasted with the American, emphasizes man's duty to his brother and man's basic equality, the mutual trust, which is the force that makes society coherent. If we look at the Australian dream and American dream, differs in terms of the identity of their own culture and language. Judith Wright, who writes a very sober and sensible kind of literary criticism with critical terms as well as contemporary critical scene. Warily welcoming it, she says, the intellect is not to be denigrated, but it is the imagination that works in poetry, and true, strong and intellectual control can be an actual more to its operation. Poetry as poetry is poetry, and this is a truth that the crucial attitude can easily lose sight of. Development of the intellect can not in itself, of course, make a stone of the heart, but it can interfere with the perception and development of feeling, by which the end all poetry lives. So here it's a trend of their own and an approach to the theoretical framework of their identity. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Can anyone of you read the last paragraph? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir. Last paragraph, sir.
Last paragraph. Sir told you last paragraph.
The separation that is affected here. Is that paragraph, sir?
Yeah, last one.
Yes, sir. The separation that is affected here between intellect and imagination is, I think, every significant in the present day context of Australian literary criticism. The Australian mind is yet to decide how Australia should figure in its literature, offensively or incidentally or in a profoundly unconscious manner, uniting in one single action the intellect and the imagination, the genius of the Australian land and people, and the genius of the individual writer. Completed, sir.
Yeah. So here, the literature of any country with its approach and trend, how it represents of the present day context. Similarly here, the significant results of the Australian literary domain shows that what it could be in terms of its literary representation. Is it offensive or defensive or incidental or unconscious in terms of its imagination or creativity and an individual writer. Here, the approach and trend is with this kind of background of individual to broader perspective of the society, and it has a kind of approach, maybe incidental or unconscious manner, no matter, but it should meet the tendency of the people of Australian literature, whether it is a genre of poetry or novel, no matter, make a stone of the heart, of course. So here it reminds that it should show the cultural, traditional, intellectual representation of the individual writer. Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So here, Australian or Afro-American or Indian literature, any literature of the world shows approaches and trends in its representation. As we know that the thematic concerns of the Australian literature and trends, approaches, here it concludes that the genius of the Australian man and people and the genius of the individual writer. It is no matter of an incident or offense or unconscious. It should be with the representation of their belonging. When you go through this, you will understand the approaches, trends in Australian literary domain. If we go through the concept of the American dream or African dream, how they differ with each other, but how they have their individual consciousness or unconsciousness or the representation of entire society. No matter here, personal is political, but it should represent in fact or imagination. With this, here, Australian literature and the approaches, trends can hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yeah, you can understand that the approaches and trends of the Australian literature. Hello. Then I stop here. We'll see the next topic in next class. So how many topics are over today?
Hello. Sir, voice is horrible, sir.
Hello, who is this? May I know who is this?
No, sir. Not clear, sir.
Yeah. So here today,
Okay.
ethnicity, Australian literature,
Okay.
and nationalism were completed. And we'll see next class the rest of the other topics. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay, sir.
Please go through the all whatever the background topics are there in unit 1. We have Caribbean and Canadian literature. It will be the last of this unit, and we'll finish next class.
Recording stopped.